For 20 years, my childhood bedroom was my sanctuary. So when my own mother told me she'd listed it on Airbnb to a stranger, I felt the floor drop out from under me. I was just a line item in my family's budget, an unused asset they could liquidate for vacation money. They had no idea that the IT girl they were mocking was the only thing standing between their comfortable lives and total chaos. And the storm was coming. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The cab pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the crisp Virginia twilight, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier than my duffel bag. Autumn was here. The air was sharp, with the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke, a smell that used to mean coming home. Now, it just felt like arriving at a destination. The house, a two-story colonial I could once navigate in the dark, looked smaller, more curated, like a picture from a magazine, instead of a place where a family actually lived. I walked up the new stone pathway, replacing the cracked concrete I remembered, and took a steadying breath before knocking. The door swung open almost immediately. It was my brother Garrett. "Ellie? Wow, you're here." He said it with the kind of practiced surprise you use on a distant cousin. He leaned in for an awkward one-armed hug, his expensive cologne filling my senses. He was already pulling away as our mother Carol appeared behind him, wiping her hands on an apron. "Eleanor, honey, you didn't call." Her smile was genuine, I thought, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same smile she wore for neighbors she barely knew. "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said, managing a weak smile of my own. I held up a small gift bag. Just a little something from Amsterdam. The inside of the house confirmed my first impression. The worn, comfortable sofa was gone, replaced by a sleek, gray leather thing that looked like no one had ever sat on it. The air smelled of lemon polish and a faint floral air freshener, not the familiar scent of Mom's baking. It was clean, sterile, and utterly foreign. Garrett led me into the living room. "So how was the flight?" he asked already, glancing at his phone buzzing on the coffee table. "It was long," I said. "We had a system-wide diagnostic that ran into some trouble over the Atlantic." His eyes glazed over. Right. "Well, glad you made it. Hey, Mom, did I tell you we finally closed the deal on that biotech firm? I shorted their stock right before the FDA announcement. Made an absolute killing." "Of course you did, honey," Mom said, beaming at him. "You're just so brilliant with all those numbers." She turned to me. "Your brother is doing so well. We're so proud." I nodded, feeling the familiar dull ache in my chest. I was an interruption, a brief pause in the regularly scheduled programming of Garrett's success. He launched into a detailed explanation of market volatility, using terms designed to exclude anyone not in his world. I felt myself shrinking. In the new armchair, my duffel bag on the floor beside me, feeling less like luggage and more like evidence that I didn't belong. This was my homecoming. Not a warm embrace, but a spectator seat at a show I had no part in. They saw me, but they weren't really looking. They were too busy admiring the son who built his empire in the light, never once wondering what I was building in the shadows. After another 10 minutes of Garrett's market analysis, I felt the walls of the living room closing in. I needed a moment of quiet space to just breathe and reset. I stood up, grabbing my duffel bag from the floor. "If you guys don't mind, I think I'll just go put my stuff away. The flight was a long one." "Of course," Honey Mom said, her attention already drifting back to Garrett. "Just go on up." The staircase creaked on the third step, just like it always had, one of the few imperfections they hadn't renovated away. But as I reached the top of the landing, I stopped. The door to my room, the one that used to be covered in band stickers I'd painstakingly peeled off before leaving for basic training, was different. It was freshly painted, a sterile, glossy white, and it had a new, sleek silver handle with a small electronic keypad lock above it. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I pushed the handle. It was unlocked. The room I stepped into was not my own. The scent of lavender and something vaguely antiseptic hit me first. The old worn oak bed frame was gone, replaced by a modern, low-profile platform bed made up with crisp hotel white linens and an absurd number of beige throw pillows. On the wall, where my map of the world used to be, there was a generic mass-produced canvas print of a dandelion. The bookshelf I'd built with my father one summer was gone, and in its place stood a minimalist desk holding a laminated card with a Wi-Fi password and a welcome note addressed to guest. I walked numbly toward the dresser. On top of it sat a small wicker basket with 2 bottles of water, a few bags of pretzels, and a city guide to Washington, D.C. I slowly opened the closet door. It was empty, save for a dozen identical wooden hangers. My clothes, my books, the shoebox filled with old photos, the stupid trophy I'd won for a science fair in 10th grade, everything was gone. The space had been professionally, methodically, and completely erased of me. I turned and walked back down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. They were in the kitchen now, laughing at something Garrett had said. I stood in the doorway until my mother noticed me. "What is it, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." My voice was quiet, dangerously steady. "What happened to my room?" Carol looked confused for a second. Then her expression cleared with a wave of dismissive understanding. "Oh, that. Honey, it just made financial sense. You're never here, and the space was just sitting empty. Your brother had the brilliant idea to list it on Airbnb. It's been booked solid for months. It's pure passive income." Passive income. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "And my things," Garrett chimed in, not even looking up from his phone. "They're in some boxes in the basement. Don't worry, we labeled most of them." The basement. The damp, unfinished space where things went to be forgotten. I stood there invisible in the doorway of my own home and understood. I wasn't a daughter who had come home. I was a ghost whose room had been exercised for profit. Dinner was an exercise in practiced indifference. My mother served a roast chicken that was perfectly cooked, but I could barely taste it. I sat at the polished dining table, a guest in the chair I'd occupied for 18 years, listening to the clinking of silverware against expensive new plates. The sting of my erased bedroom had settled into a cold, hard knot in my gut, a feeling I was all too familiar with from years of silent, unanswered emails and one-sided holiday calls. Garrett naturally held court. He was in the middle of a long, self-congratulatory story about a recent victory in the market. "So the analysts were all saying to hold, that the fundamentals were strong," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "But I saw the pattern. I felt it. The algorithm I built flagged a micro shift in the Hong Kong exchange. It was nothing a blip, but I knew. I told my whole team to short the stock. They thought I was crazy." My mother listened with rapt attention, hanging on his every word. "And what happened, honey?" He took a dramatic pause, savoring the moment. 2 days later, their primary supplier defaulted. The stock cratered. We made a fortune while everyone else was losing their shirts. He leaned back, a smug grin on his face, and finally turned his attention to me. "You see, Ellie, that's the real world. It's not about following orders or filling out forms. It's about instinct, guts. It's a world that rewards risk takers." I took a slow sip of water, my hand steady. "There are different kinds of risk, Garrett." He chuckled, a short, condescending sound. "Oh, I'm sure. But let's be honest. The kind of risk I take ends with a $150,000 bonus. The kind you take ends with what? A government pension and a thank you for your service." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. It was a direct hit, and he knew it. My mother just smiled faintly, as if her brilliant son had just made a clever, harmless joke. I placed my fork down, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "My work has its own rewards," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm sure it does," he shot back. "But I just don't get it. You were always the smartest one of us, top of your class in math, a natural with logic. You had a standing offer from one of the top investment banks in New York right out of college. You could have been a vice president by now, running your own division. Instead, you chose to be what is it you do again? Some kind of glorified IT girl for the government." A glorified IT girl. The phrase was designed to diminish, to trivialize 2 decades of a career he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He didn't see the nights spent staring at lines of code that felt like staring into the abyss. He didn't know about the silent wars fought not with bullets, but with keystrokes, where the fate of millions could rest on a single command. To him, I was just the quiet, disappointing sister who played with computers while he conquered the world. The silence at the table was my answer. He took it as a victory. The following afternoon, the house spilled out onto the manicured lawn for one of my mother's meticulously planned garden parties. It was the kind of event designed to showcase success, a stage for Garrett to hold court among his colleagues and our parents' wealthy friends. The sun was bright, the sky was a perfect cloudless blue, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and expensive perfume. I stood near a sprawling oak tree, holding a glass of iced tea. I didn't want feeling like a stranger in a foreign embassy. I had tried to blend in, making polite, empty conversation with a neighbor who asked vague questions about my life in Washington, D.C. But my mind was elsewhere, still replaying the dinner conversation from the night before. The words echoed in my head, a glorified IT girl. It was a brand, a label they had seared onto me, and I could feel it every time someone's eyes skimmed past me to find someone more interesting to talk to. After about an hour, I saw Garrett step onto the raised stone patio, tapping a fork against his champagne flute. The light chatter across the lawn quieted as all eyes turned to him. He had a natural command of the room, an easy confidence that I knew I had never possessed. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," he began, a broad political smile spreading across his face. "I just want to say how wonderful it is to see all of our friends and family here today. My parents and I are so grateful to have you in our lives." He paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air. He then raised his glass a little higher, his gaze sweeping across the crowd before it landed deliberately on me. "I want to propose a toast," he continued, his voice ringing with performative sincerity. "A toast to family. A place where some of us are fortunate enough to be out there building empires, taking risks, and shaping the future. And where others, well, they play their part too. They keep the Wi-Fi running so the rest of us can work. Every role is important, I suppose." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It wasn't cruel or overt, but it was worse. It was a soft, knowing chuckle, the kind people share when they're in on a private joke. A few people glanced my way with a flicker of pity before looking away, embarrassed for me. In that moment, standing under the bright, unforgiving sun, I had never felt more publicly dismissed. It was a clean, sharp, and perfectly executed social assassination. The world seemed to narrow, the cheerful sounds of the party fading into a dull roar. There was only the echo of that laughter and the weight of dozens of eyes. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I simply met my brother's smug gaze for a long second, my expression unreadable. Then I placed my untouched glass of iced tea on a nearby table, turned my back on the party, and walked into the quiet of the house. No one tried to stop me. The cool, quiet air of the house was a welcome relief, but it offered no comfort. The faint sounds of the party, the laughter and music drifted in through the open windows, a constant reminder of the humiliation I had just walked away from. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just moved wandering into the living room, a space that felt more like a showroom than a place for family. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for something familiar, something real to hold on to. That's when I noticed it. The old dark wood bookshelf that had stood against the far wall for as long as I could remember was gone. It had been my grandfather's, a heavy, solid piece of furniture that smelled of old paper and history. In its place, dominating the entire wall, was a massive wall-mounted flat-screen television, its dark, glossy surface reflecting the room like a black mirror. A new wave of cold dread washed over me. The bookshelf had held my entire collection. First editions I had saved for years to buy worn paperbacks. I had read a dozen times, history texts with my notes scribbled in the margins. It wasn't just a collection of books. It was a map of my mind. My feet carried me down the hallway to the basement door. I flicked on the single bare bulb, illuminating the damp, concrete space. In the corner, I saw the cardboard boxes from my bedroom hastily labeled with a black marker. Clothes, personal items, but the boxes for my books, the ones I had carefully packed myself years ago, were nowhere to be seen. They were just gone. I walked back outside, my movements stiff, robotic. I found my mother by the drink table laughing with a neighbor. I waited until the neighbor walked away, then I stepped forward. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "where are the books?" She turned, a slight frown on her face. "What books, honey?" "The ones from the living room, from Grandpa's bookshelf." Her expression cleared, replaced by that same dismissive practicality from the day before. "Oh, those." Honestly, Eleanor, they were just collecting dust, and that old bookshelf was so dark and heavy. We sold it all. It paid for half of that beautiful new television. Doesn't it just make the whole room look more modern? I stared at her, the sound of the party finally fading into a distant hum. She didn't understand. She would never understand. They hadn't just redecorated. They had curated a new family history, one that didn't include me. The Airbnb room was for my physical absence, but this was different. This was the erasure of my mind, my passions, my past. It was the final quiet confirmation that in this house, I was not a person to be loved, but a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. I had been completely and thoroughly written out of the story. I retreated to the quiet of the guest room. Not my room, never my room again. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the sterile perfection of the space, feeling like an insult. The sounds of the party below were a dull, throbbing ache, a soundtrack to my own displacement. I stared at the blank walls, at the generic art, and felt a profound sense of nothingness. This was the bottom. There was nowhere left to fall. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, searching for the familiar weight of my phone. I pulled it out, not to call anyone or to scroll through a feed of lives that weren't mine, but just to hold something that was unequivocally my own. As my thumb brushed the screen, it lit up. A single discreet notification icon glowed at the top. It wasn't a text message or a social media alert. It was a secure push notification from a system so encrypted it barely existed. My posture shifted instantly. The grief and humiliation receded, replaced by a deep muscle memory of focus. I unlocked the phone, my fingers moving quickly to open the application. The screen was black, with a single line of green, alphanumeric text waiting for me. A query, a status check from a world away. My thumbs moved rapidly across the keyboard, typing a response that was less like a sentence and more like a key. A string of numbers, letters, and symbols that confirmed my identity and my operational status. I hit send. The message vanished, leaving no trace. A moment later, a new line of text appeared. Stand by. Just then, the guest room door creaked open. Garrett stood there, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand, a smirk on his face. Hiding out in here? He drawled, leaning against the door frame. Don't be so sensitive, Ellie. It was just a little joke. You tech people need to learn how to lighten up. He glanced down at my phone, still glowing in my hand. He saw the black screen, the single line of text. Still fixing a printer jam for one of the old guys at the office, he scoffed, shaking his head. You work way too much for a job that pays so little. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just looked at him, my expression calm, unreadable. Inside, something had shifted. The sting of his words was still there, but it was distant now, like an echo from another room. He saw a black screen and meaningless text. He saw his failure of a sister hiding from a party. He had absolutely no idea what he was looking at, and he had no idea what was about to happen. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The party downstairs could continue its charade. My world, the real one, had just checked in, and it was waiting for my command. Garrett eventually grew bored of my silence and sauntered back to his audience downstairs, leaving me in the quiet of the guest room. I didn't move from my spot on the edge of the bed. The secure message had changed the air in the room. The lingering sting of my brother's insults, the ache of my mother's betrayal. It was all still there, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. A quiet, thrumming energy hummed just beneath my skin. They thought I was hiding, licking my wounds. In reality, I was waiting. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated once. Not a buzz or a ring, but a single haptic pulse. I pulled it out. An incoming call from a number that didn't exist. It was a string of zeros, a digital ghost. I answered, my voice low and steady. Vance. The voice on the other end was deep, familiar, and stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of General Miles, my direct superior, and one of the few people on the planet who knew the full scope of my work. Director, just a courtesy call. We've received your status confirmation. Are you secure? The title director felt strange in this house. Here I was, Ellie, the awkward sister, the IT girl. But on this line, I was who I truly was. Affirmative, General, I replied. I'm secure, just dealing with some local interference. I could almost hear the thin, humorless smile in his voice. Understood. Just wanted to confirm you were stateside and clear of any operational conflicts. We're tracking some unusual chatter originating from the Eastern European sector. It's probably nothing, but we're moving to a heightened state of alert as a precaution. My mind immediately began running threat assessments, calculating probabilities. I could see the network maps in my head, the glowing nodes of potential vulnerability. Eastern Europe. That could mean anything from state-sponsored hackers to a rogue faction of digital anarchists. I understand, sir. Keep me looped in on any significant developments. He paused for a beat. There was something else in his tone now, something that went beyond a standard operational check-in. Eleanor? He said, his voice softening just a fraction. Don't let the civilians get to you. What you do matters in a way they can't possibly comprehend. Don't ever forget that. Thank you, General. I won't. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, the silence of the room rushing back in. His words were a lifeline. It wasn't praise or validation. It was something more important. It was a simple statement of fact from a world where my worth wasn't measured by my salary or my social standing, but by the firewalls I built and the disasters I prevented. It was a reminder that outside the four walls of this house, I was not invisible. I was a guardian. A seed of hope, small but resilient, began to sprout in the barren ground of my despair. They didn't know who I was. They had no idea about the conversations. I had the power. I wielded the secrets I kept. But they would. The chatter he mentioned, the heightened state of alert, it felt like a distant roll of thunder on a clear day. Something was coming. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel dread. I felt a flicker of anticipation. The rest of the party basked in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless chatter. The phone call had created a shield around me, an invisible barrier that my family's casual cruelty could no longer penetrate. I was operating on two levels now. On the surface, I was the quiet sister, the awkward guest. But underneath, a part of my mind was already back at the command center, running simulations, analyzing the chatter General Miles had mentioned. After the last guest had departed, my mother cornered me in the kitchen, her hands busy clearing away half-empty wine glasses. She was in her element, organizing and planning. "Eleanor, I was just talking with Garrett," she said, not looking at me. "That Airbnb money is adding up quite nicely. We were thinking, if we have a good winter season, we might finally take that river cruise through Europe next spring. Vienna, Budapest. Wouldn't that be lovely?" I leaned against the counter watching her. The conversation felt like it was happening a million miles away. "Yes, Mom, that sounds lovely." Her comment wasn't meant to be malicious. In her mind, she was including me in their happy, prosperous future. But all I heard was the confirmation of my own erasure. The profits from my stolen space, my dismantled childhood, would be used to fund their picture-perfect vacation. A vacation I knew I would never be a part of, not really. Garrett walked in, phone pressed to his ear, deep in a conversation about stock options. He paced back and forth, a predator in his natural habitat. He gestured for a glass, and my mother quickly poured him one from an open bottle of wine. He took it without a word of thanks, his entire focus on the voice on the other end of the line. He finally ended the call with a triumphant laugh. "Done deal," he announced to the room. "That's another $20,000 in the bank before the market even opens on Monday." He took a long swallow of wine, then looked at me, a familiar, condescending glint in his eye. "See, Ellie, that's how the world works. Money never sleeps. You should really think about your future. You can't just be a government cog forever." A cog in a machine he couldn't see. A machine that at that very moment was working silently to protect the very market that gave him his wealth and his arrogance. The irony was so thick, I could almost taste it. He saw himself as a titan, a master of the universe, moving markets with his brilliant instincts. He had no idea he was just a passenger on a ship, completely oblivious to the storms on the horizon and the unseen crew working below deck to keep him from sinking. They continued to plan their European vacation, debating over itineraries and tour packages. They were so blissfully, arrogantly unaware. Their world was small, safe, and gilded. They filled it with talk of money and travel, never once imagining the complex, invisible architecture that held it all up. They didn't know that the stability they took for granted was a fragile thing, and that the person they saw as the least important in the room was the one who spent her life defending it. They were planning a cruise while I was preparing for a war. Later that evening, the party was a distant memory, and the house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Garrett was in his home office, likely admiring his portfolio. My mother was in the living room watching a home renovation show on the giant television that had replaced my library. I was sitting on the back patio, the cool night air a welcome change from the stifling atmosphere inside. I was watching the stars, the same stars I used to track on my command center's satellite feeds. My phone, resting on the table beside me, remained silent, but I didn't need it to ring to know something was happening. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the global, digital landscape that I could sense, like a change in barometric pressure. The chatter General Miles had mentioned wasn't just chatter anymore. It was escalating. It was organizing. Inside, I could hear the television drone on. A news anchor's voice broke through the home renovation show during a commercial break. In international news, Unconfirmed reports are emerging of widespread coordinated cyber disruptions targeting financial institutions across Western Europe. Officials are urging calm, calling the events minor technical glitches, but sources within the intelligence community suggest a more sophisticated threat may be at play. Garrett appeared in the doorway, a scowl on his face. Did you hear that he asked, an edge of annoyance in his voice? The market's going to be a mess on Monday. These idiots are probably running on outdated software. It's always some amateur mistake that spooks the investors. He looked at the sky completely oblivious. He saw a nuisance, an inconvenience that might affect his bottom line. He didn't see the first tremor of an earthquake. It's probably nothing, he said, echoing the official line, trying to reassure himself. Just the media blowing things out of proportion, as usual. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on the sky. He was wrong. This wasn't an amateur mistake. This was a probe, a test. They were knocking on the doors, checking the locks, seeing who was home. And they were getting bolder. The disruptions in Europe were just the warm-up. The main event was coming. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The personal hurts, the family drama, it all seemed to fade into the background, becoming small and insignificant in the face of what was building. This was my world. This was the chessboard I knew how to play on. My family saw me as a pawn easily sacrificed. They had no idea I was the queen. The wind picked up rustling the leaves of the old oak tree. It sounded like a whisper, a warning. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here, and I was the only one in this house who could hear it coming. Garrett went back inside, confident in his own small world. I stayed on the patio, watching and waiting for the signal I knew would soon arrive. The signal came just after 10 the next morning. It was Sunday, a day of quiet ritual in my family's house. My mother was preparing an elaborate brunch. Garrett was on the back patio, shouting into his phone at what sounded like his broker in London, his voice tight with frustration over the European market's instability. The air was thick with the scent of coffee, bacon, and simmering tension. I was in the living room nursing a cup of tea when I first heard it. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was a deep, rhythmic thumping, a sound that didn't belong in the peaceful, manicured world of this suburban neighborhood. It was the sound of rotor blades beating against the air, growing steadily closer, more powerful. Garrett came storming in from the patio, his face flushed with anger. "What is that noise? Are you kidding me? Someone probably hired a helicopter for a scenic tour. The nerve of some people." My mother rushed to the window, peering up at the sky. "Oh my goodness, it's coming this way. It's flying so low." The sound was deafening now, a physical presence that vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the new wine glasses in the cabinet. It wasn't a scenic tour helicopter. This was the sound of military-grade power. It was the sound of a purpose-built machine, a predator descending from the sky. The thumping grew into a deafening roar as the helicopter passed directly over the house. Outside, neighbors began to spill out of their homes, pointing upwards, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Garrett's frustration turned to disbelief. What the hell is going on? Is it the police? Then the sound began to recede, but only slightly. It was circling, and then it began to descend. Not on the street, not at the nearby park, but towards our own backyard. "It's landing," my mother whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "It's landing on our lawn." Garrett and my mother rushed to the back glass doors, staring out at the impossible sight. A Black Hawk, a sleek matte black military helicopter, completely devoid of any identifying markings, was settling onto their perfectly manicured lawn. Its powerful downdraft flattened the prize-winning rose bushes my mother was so proud of, kicking up a whirlwind of grass clippings and mulch that peppered the windows. The arrogant confidence of my brother's world, the carefully constructed peace of my mother's home, it was all being literally blown away. The engine noise began to die down, but the heavy thumping of the rotor blades continued to slice through the air. The side door of the helicopter slid open. This was it. The real world had just crashed their garden party. My mother and Garrett were frozen at the back door, their faces pressed against the glass like spectators at a disaster. They were watching the spectacle. I was watching the mission unfold. As the side door of the Blackhawk slid open, a figure emerged, ducking under the still spinning rotor blades. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was a man in a sharp, dark suit, his movements economical and urgent. He carried a heavy-duty tactical tablet in one hand. He scanned the house, his eyes bypassing my mother and Garrett completely, and locked directly onto me. I pushed myself off the armchair and walked calmly toward the back door, my own sense of purpose, a quiet shield against the chaos. As I approached, the man in the suit met me on the patio, his voice cutting through the thumping air, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Director Vance," he said, his tone a mixture of deference and extreme urgency. He didn't waste a second on pleasantries. He held up the tablet, its screen glowing with complex, cascading lines of red code. "The attack is escalating. They've breached the primary firewalls. They aren't targeting the power grid. They're targeting the core servers of the New York Stock Exchange. They're trying to collapse the entire financial system." I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. It was Garrett. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The world of numbers and stocks he thought he commanded was now the target of a full-scale assault. His universe was imploding. The agent continued his focus entirely on me. "We have 2 countermeasures ready to deploy, ma'am. Protocol Chimera will isolate the threat and sever the connection to the exchange instantly. It will trigger an automatic, market-wide circuit breaker, freezing all trades for the next 24 hours. Protocol Leviathan is riskier. It might contain the breach without a full shutdown, but if it fails, the virus could cascade into the national power grid. We need your command, Director. What are your orders?" Every head turned to me, the agent, my mother, and my brother. The world had shrunk to this single moment, to this single decision. Garrett, his voice, a choked, desperate whisper, stammered, "No, a circuit breaker. It would wipe out everything. The entire quarter's profits. Gone." I didn't look at him. I didn't acknowledge his pathetic plea. My gaze was fixed on the tablet, my mind processing the variables, the risks, the certainties. Then I looked up, meeting the agent's steady gaze. My voice was cold clear, an absolute ringing out across the patio with the undeniable weight of authority. "Execute Protocol Chimera. The nation's stability is not negotiable." The agent didn't hesitate. He simply nodded, his expression one of complete professional resolve. "Roger that, Director." His fingers flew across the screen of the tablet, inputting the command. He turned on his heel, gave a curt nod of respect, and sprinted back toward the helicopter. The world seemed to hold its breath. My mother stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror and incomprehension. But my gaze was on Garrett. He was staring at me, not with anger, not with confusion, but with a raw, primal terror. It was the look of a man who had just watched his entire world, his entire identity, get deleted with a single command from the person he disdained the most. He took a stumbling step toward me, his hand outstretched as if to plead. "Ellie, you can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't understand what you've just done." I finally looked at him, truly looked at him. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The power he held over me, the power to hurt and diminish, had vanished. "I understand perfectly, Garrett," I said, and my voice was calm, almost gentle. I did my job. The agent was back in the Blackhawk now. The side door slid shut, sealing him inside. With a surge of engine power that shook the very foundation of the house, the helicopter lifted off the ground. It rose vertically, clearing the oak tree with ease, and then banked sharply, disappearing over the rooftops as quickly as it had arrived. It left behind a whirlwind of torn-up grass, scattered leaves, and a silence that was louder and more profound than the roar of its engines. In that silence, Garrett's phone began to buzz frantically. Then my mother's, then both at the same time. Friends, neighbors, business associates, all undoubtedly reacting to the impossible news that was just breaking. But my brother didn't move to answer it. He simply stood there, his face ashen, his body trembling slightly. The empire he was so proud of had been put on hold, its fate decided in a language he didn't speak by a sister he never knew. He slowly sank onto the edge of the stone patio, his head in his hands. The champagne flute he had used for his toast, the one where he had publicly humiliated me, lay shattered at his feet, its broken pieces glittering in the morning sun like the wreckage of his arrogance. The power hadn't just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably reversed. As I stepped onto the Blackhawk, the familiar scent of jet fuel and electronics enveloped me. It felt more like home than the house I had just left behind. Inside the cabin was a command center in miniature. The agent who had briefed me, whose name I knew was Sanderson, was already plugged into a communications console, barking orders into a headset. He glanced up as I buckled myself in. "We're patched through to the Pentagon director. General Miles is holding for you." I took the headset he offered the world of my family's manicured lawn and shattered champagne glasses dissolving completely. The real world, my world, took its place. "Vance here," I said, my voice steady. "Eleanor," the general's voice came through crisp and clear. "Good call on Chimera. We're tracking the virus. It's contained. You saved the grid. The White House is, pleased." That was as close to a glowing compliment as General Miles ever got, and it was more than enough. I spent the short flight back to the command center at Fort Meade, receiving status updates, coordinating with other departments, my mind completely absorbed in the complex cascading effects of my decision. As we landed, Sanderson handed me a tablet. It was cued to a live news broadcast. The screen was filled with the familiar face of a CNN anchor, her expression grim and serious. Behind her, a breaking news banner flashed in bright red. "Market in chaos. Nuayas halts trading amid unprecedented cyber attack." The anchor began to speak. "We are getting reports from sources inside the federal government that this morning's market shutdown was a deliberate defensive measure to stop what is being called a nationally significant cyber threat. While officials are remaining tight-lipped, one name is beginning to surface as the key decision-maker in this crisis." A photo appeared on the screen beside her. It was my official NSA file photo. It was professional, severe, and completely unfamiliar to the people I had just left behind. "We are being told that Eleanor Vance, the NSA's director of cyber warfare and infrastructure security, personally gave the order to execute what sources are calling a fail-safe protocol, preventing a far greater catastrophe. Little is known publicly about Director Vance, but she is being hailed tonight in Washington circles as the unseen guardian who pulled the nation back from the brink of a full-scale financial collapse." The camera zoomed in on my picture, my name, my title. Director Eleanor Vance, the IT girl, the quiet, disappointing daughter, the sister who was only good for fixing Wi-Fi. It was all gone, replaced by this new, undeniable truth broadcast for the entire world to see. I watched the screen not with triumph, but with a quiet, profound sense of finality. They could no longer erase me. The world now knew my name. The command center was a hive of controlled chaos. Analysts sat hunched over glowing screens, their faces illuminated by streams of data. The air hummed with the quiet, intense energy of a crisis being managed. For the next several hours, I was completely immersed debriefing with the general, coordinating with international intelligence partners, and overseeing the forensic analysis of the attack. My personal life, the house in Virginia, the shattered glass on the patio, it all felt like a dream from a lifetime ago. My personal phone, which I had left on silent in my go bag, was an afterthought. It wasn't until a young lieutenant brought me a fresh cup of coffee, well past midnight, that I finally took a moment for myself. I retreated to my small adjoining office and pulled out the device. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, a digital avalanche of desperation. 15 missed calls from Garrett. 10 missed calls from my mother. A flood of text messages followed, each one more frantic than the last. The first one from Garrett was simple. "Ellie, call me. Now." The next one was more panicked. "What is going on? My broker is calling me. Everyone is calling me. They're saying your name on the news." Then came the pleading. "Please, Ellie, I don't understand. You have to fix this. Tell them to turn the market back on." My mother's messages were a different kind of chaos. "Eleanor, the neighbors are at the door. Reporters are calling the house. What did you do?" And then later, a message that was softer, more bewildered. "We saw you on CNN. Director, we don't understand. Please call us. We're worried." Worried. They were worried now. They weren't worried when they rented out my childhood bedroom to strangers. They weren't worried when they sold my history to buy a television. They weren't worried when they publicly humiliated me in front of their friends. But now, with their comfortable world disrupted and their names associated with a national crisis, now they were worried. I read through the messages, my expression unchanged. There was no anger, no bitterness. It was like reading a case file about people I didn't know. Their panic, their confusion, it couldn't reach me here. It was a language from a world I no longer inhabited. They had built a wall between us, over 20 years, brick by brick, with every ignored phone call, every dismissive comment, every casual act of erasure. They thought the wall was to keep me out. They never imagined it was also to keep me safe from them. I held my finger over Garrett's contact name. I could call. I could explain. I could listen to his desperate, self-serving pleas. I could accept my mother's bewildered, too-late apology. I could do all of that. Instead, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. The screen flickered and went black. For years, I had lived in their silence. Tonight, for the first time, I was choosing my own. The next 24 hours were a blur of intense, focused work. We traced the attack to its source, patched the vulnerabilities, and developed new countermeasures to prevent a future breach. The market reopened the following day, shaken but stable. The crisis was over. My part in it was done. On the second morning, General Miles called me into his office. The room was sparse functional, dominated by a large American flag standing in the corner. He was standing by the window, looking out over the sprawling military base. "The president sends his personal thanks," he said without turning around. "He wants to meet with you next week." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll be there, General." He finally turned to face me, his expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. "Your family has been trying to get through to the base switchboard. They're persistent." I met his gaze, my own expression, calm. "I'm aware of that, sir." He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to read the lines of a complex code. "Sanderson told me what happened. The helicopter on the lawn. Your brother?" He paused. "Do you want to call them back? We can facilitate a secure line if you need one." It was a genuine offer, a gesture of concern, from a man who rarely dealt in personal matters. He was giving me an opening, a chance to connect, to explain, to perhaps find some kind of resolution. The old me, the Ellie who craved their approval, would have jumped at the chance. She would have seen it as an opportunity to finally make them understand, to force them to see her worth. But that Ellie was gone. She had died somewhere between the sold bookshelf and the shattered champagne flute. "I appreciate the offer, General," I said, and my voice was even devoid of the emotion he might have expected. "But it's not necessary." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're not going to talk to them?" I thought about it for a second, not about what I would say, but about the very concept of the conversation. It felt pointless, like trying to explain color to someone who was born blind. Their world was built on a different operating system. My truth would always be incompatible with their reality. "There's nothing left to say," I replied. "For years they chose what was easy over what was right. They built a world that had no room for me in it. That was their decision. Now I'm making mine. My decision is to build a world that has no room for their chaos." A flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe understanding, passed through the general's eyes. He gave a single decisive nod. "Understood, Director." There was no sense of triumph in my words, no anger, no desire for revenge. The hot, burning need for their validation had been replaced by something cooler, stronger, and infinitely more peaceful. It was the quiet, unshakable finality of a firewall that has been properly configured. The connection had been severed. The threat had been neutralized. I was secure. A week later, after my meeting at the White House, I learned that Garrett had managed to get an authorized visitor pass to the base. He had likely pulled every string he had called in, every favor, perhaps even exaggerated a family emergency. His desperation, it seemed, was a powerful motivator. I was in my office reviewing after-action reports when my aide informed me that a Mr. Vance was waiting for me at the main gate's visitor center. I considered ignoring it. I had every right to, but something compelled me to go. It wasn't for him. It was for me. It was the final loose end, the last system process that needed to be terminated. The visitor center was a small, impersonal building with plastic chairs and faded motivational posters. Garrett was standing by the window, staring out at the uniformed personnel walking by. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the arrogant confidence he wore like a suit of armor. He just looked like a man who had lost his footing. He turned as I entered, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Ellie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." I didn't invite him to sit. I just stood there, my arms crossed, waiting. "I don't understand any of this," he began, his voice strained. "Director, the NSA. All those years I thought you were just fiddling with computers." I didn't answer. I let the silence hang in the air, forcing him to confront the sheer depth of his own ignorance. "Look," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "I get it. You're important. I was an idiot. A jerk. I said things I shouldn't have. But the market. Ellie, my portfolio is a disaster. My clients are panicking. You shut everything down. You have to do something." I listened to his words, and what struck me was the complete absence of any real apology. He wasn't sorry for how he treated me. He was sorry for the consequences that had befallen him. His plea was entirely self-serving. "I am doing something, Garrett," I said, and my voice was calm and even. "I'm doing my job. The job I have been doing for 20 years while you were busy building your empire. But this isn't just a job, this is family." My gaze was steady. Family. Was it family when you sold my books to buy a television? Was it family when you rented out my room to strangers? Was it family when you stood up in front of 50 people and mocked me for a cheap laugh? He had the decency to look away, a flicker of shame in his eyes. I didn't think." "No, you didn't." I agreed. "You never did. You saw the world in terms of profit and loss, winners and losers. You could never understand a world built on duty and sacrifice. You looked at me and all you saw was a bad investment. I took a step closer, my voice dropping, but losing none of its intensity. Let me be perfectly clear. The world of numbers you live in exists. It thrives because a world you can't see. My world works every single day to protect it. You should be grateful for that. But do not ever again make the mistake of confusing the two. I held his gaze for a long moment. He had nothing to say. There was nothing he could say. His entire frame seemed to sag defeated. I turned and walked toward the door. This conversation is over. Behind me, I heard him whisper my name, a last desperate attempt. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out of the visitor center and back into the sunlight, leaving him behind a ghost, trapped in the wreckage of his own making. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but it was a different kind of storm. It was a storm of purpose. My role at the agency was elevated. I was no longer just a director hidden in the shadows of cyber warfare. I was given a new mandate to spearhead a national initiative to recruit and mentor the next generation of cybersecurity specialists with a particular focus on finding unconventional talent from overlooked communities. My new office was larger with a window that overlooked the Potomac River, but it wasn't the view or the space that mattered. It was the work. For the first time, I wasn't just building firewalls, I was building bridges. One of my first tasks was to create a new privately funded scholarship program. I didn't have to think long about the name, the Vance Initiative. It was a quiet act of reclamation, taking the name that had been used to diminish me and turning it into a symbol of opportunity for others. The initiative would provide full tuition and a direct mentorship track into the NSA for gifted young women in STEM fields, especially those who, like me, didn't come from a world of privilege and connections. One afternoon, I was reviewing the first round of applications. There were dozens of them, each one a story of brilliance and resilience. Young women from small towns in the Midwest, first-generation college students, from inner-city schools, all with staggering test scores and a raw, hungry ambition in their personal essays. They were the ones who were always told they were too quiet, too nerdy, too different. They were the ones I was looking for. My aide knocked and entered, followed by a young woman in a crisp new pantsuit. She was one of the first interns selected for my program. Her name was Maya, a brilliant coder from a community college in Arizona. She clutched a tablet to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nerves. "You wanted to see me director?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Sit down, Maya. Tell me about the diagnostic you were running on the satellite uplink." She hesitated for a second, then launched into a highly technical, incredibly insightful analysis of a potential vulnerability she had discovered. Her explanation was flawless, her logic impeccable. She wasn't just smart. She was gifted. When she finished, I leaned back in my chair. "That's excellent work. You see things that people with twice your experience miss. Why do you think that is?" She looked down at her hands, a flush creeping up her neck. "I don't know, ma'am. I guess when you're used to being on the outside, you learn to see the things that other people don't notice." A small smile touched my lips. "I know exactly what you mean." In that moment, I saw the future. It wasn't in boardrooms or on stock exchanges. It was right here in this office, in the bright, determined eyes of a young woman who had been underestimated her whole life. The pain of my past, the years of feeling invisible and undervalued, hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a wound. It was the fuel for my new mission. I wasn't just protecting the nation's infrastructure anymore. I was building its future, one brilliant, overlooked mind at a time. Months have melted into a year. I didn't return to the house in Virginia. I didn't need to. I found a small apartment in Washington, D.C., a place with high ceilings and old hardwood floors that groaned with character. It's filled not with expensive furniture, but with secondhand books, maps of places I've been, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on my own terms. The space isn't a rejection of my past. It's simply a testament to the fact that I survived it. My mother sends cards on my birthday. They are filled with brief, hesitant updates about her garden and Garrett's new, less glamorous job at a smaller firm. I read them, and I feel a distant, quiet pity. They are trapped in the past forever, trying to understand a moment that redefined their world while I have moved on. My real family is the one I have built. It's in the weekly video calls with General Miles, who now treats me not just as a colleague, but as a confidant. It's in the brilliant young faces of the Vance Initiative interns, who see me not as a mythical director, but as a mentor who understands their struggles, because I have lived them. It's in the quiet respect of my team, who know that my authority comes not from a title, but from the trenches we have fought in together. This morning, I received an email with a photo attached. It was Maya, my first intern. She was standing in front of the NSA headquarters, holding up her official permanent employee badge. Her smile was wide and incandescent, a beacon of pure, unadulterated triumph. The email subject line was simple: "Thank you for seeing me." I looked at the picture for a long time, a feeling of deep, profound peace settling over me. The wounds of my past may never fully disappear. They are a part of my code, the source of my strength, but they no longer define me. The need for their approval, the ache of their dismissal, it's all gone. It has been replaced by something far more powerful: purpose. My home is not a place with a specific address. It's the quiet confidence in my own heart. It's the knowledge that my work matters. It's the understanding that true belonging doesn't come from being accepted by others. It comes from finally fully and unapologetically accepting yourself. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The world was vast and full of challenges, and I was ready for them. I didn't need a family to give me a name. I had earned my own, and it was a name I was finally proud to carry. Slight pause, shift in tone for the call to action. The greatest victories aren't always the ones the world sees. Sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight to reclaim your own worth from those who tried to take it away. Your value is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. It is inherent. It is yours. If this story resonated with you, type A1 in the comments below. Let us know what part of Eleanor's journey you connected with the most, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know whose story we'll tell next.